viewers, my name is Jeff Oduol and this is Chemistry Now. Tonight we want to look at naming of esters. Now we have three examples here that we want to try to name, but before you name an ester, it is important to know what esters are. How are they formed? Now esters are compound formed when an alkanol reacts with alkanoic acid. Alkanoic acid in presence of a mineral acid like concentrated sulfuric acid. In presence of sulfuric acid, in this reaction you'll end up with an ester plus water. Now alcohols, alkanol, are also known as alcohols. And alkanoic acids are also referred to as carboxylic acids. That one should not be confusing. The general name for ester is also alkyl. Sometimes you may find that they are called alkyl alkanoates. Now, if you look at this reaction, it looks familiar because it tends to imitate the reaction between just a normal acid-base reaction, which will always give you salt plus water. You can see that alcohol or an alkanol plus alkanoic acid gives you ester and water. The only difference is that this one is an organic reaction where the reaction is reversible, and this one, the fourth reaction, is complete. Now, this is important in naming of esters. Very important in naming of esters, because you realize that even the naming of the ester will tend to borrow from naming of the product formed here. For instance, let us take an example. You have sodium hydroxide, which is a base. Then reaction with an acid, a simple acid, let's say hydrochloric acid, you will end up with sodium chloride plus water. Now you can see that the salt formed here, which is, we can say that we can compare to the ester, is called sodium chloride. Now this is important because it will inform how we are going to name the ester. Sodium, the first part of the name, you can see a salt must have two parts in a name. Just like esters also have two parts, alkyl alkanoate. Now the first part of the name of the salt comes from the base. Sodium comes from sodium hydroxide. The second bit of the name comes from the acid, chloride, from hydrochloric acid. Now the same applies when you're naming an ester. Now, when you're naming an ester, you can see that the ester has two parts. The name of an ester has two parts, alkyl alkanoate. Now, the alkyl part will always come from the alcohol, and the alkanoate part of the name will always come from the alkanoic acid that is used in that name. For example, if you have methanol reacting with, let's say, ethanoic acid, the reaction is always reversible. In presence of sulfuric acid, you'll always end up with the ester called methyl ethanoate. You write it in a line, methyl ethanoate. Methyl ethanoate will be the ester that will be formed plus water. You can see that the first bit of the name methyl comes from methanol, and the second bit, ethanoate, comes from the acid. So that is the general procedure of naming esters. Now you can see that from this is organic chemistry 2. From organic chemistry 1, we learned that if an organic compound has one carbon atom, then it uses the prefix meth. That is one carbon atom. When it has two carbon atoms, it will be eth. When you have three, it will be prop. If you have four carbon atoms, it will be but. If there are five, you will have pent. If you have six, for instance, you'll have hex, and so on and so forth. But hardly you will go past maybe 10 in O-level chemistry. So this one is the same. This one also applies to alcohols and alkanoic acids. So this is going to be important. Now we have examples here that we want to name. Let us look at now the problems that we have tonight. We have this particular ester, CH3, CH2, oxygen, oxygen, then you have CH. Now, when you're given a compound like this, in which it is just a simple formula and not a structural formula, you immediately you have to know which carbon is from the alcohol or the alkanol and which one is from the acid. Now, this is the procedure. You first focus on the two oxygen atoms. Esters always have two oxygen atoms. Now, when you focus on the two oxygen atoms, then I want you to focus on the two carbons bordering the two oxygen atoms. Now, this is the rule. The carbon that has the lowest number of hydrogen atoms is from the acid. So if you look at this carbon, so the two carbon atoms in our case is this and this. Now, this carbon has two hydrogen atoms bonded to it. This carbon atom has just one. So which means that this one is the lowest is from the acid. So this one is from the acid, the alkanoic acid. And this one must be from the alcohol or alkanol. Now, the moment you know that, now the naming of the ester becomes easy because you can now identify the alcohol because our alcohol begins here going this way. So our alcohol has how many carbon atoms? Two carbon atoms, this one and this one. So this alcohol is definitely ethanol. And this acid has only one carbon atom, so it is definitely methanoic acid. Now, after you have identified the alcohol and the acid, the alkanoic acid in that ester, then you can name it easily because we said that the first part of the name, the alkyl part, comes from the alkanol, and the second part, the alkanoid part, comes from the alkanoic acid. So our alcohol today is ethanol, and so this ester must be ethyl methanoate. Ethyl methanoate. So this is the name of our ester there. Now let us consider the next. Let us look at the next. The next compound is that ester CH3, COO, CH3. Now the examiner might choose to flip the ester because whether it is written beginning here going this way or this way, this side going that way, it remains the same. But if you follow this procedure, you will name it regardless. Now, again, you look at the two oxygen atoms in that ester, then you take your consideration to the two carbon atoms that are neighboring the oxygen atoms. Now, it is this one and this one. Then I say that the carbon atom with the least number of hydrogen atoms is from the acid, the alkanoic acid, and the one with the most is from the alcohol. Now, This carbon atom has no hydrogen attached to it, because as you can see, all these 3 hydrogens are bonded to these carbon atoms, and so this one has 0 hydrogen atoms. This one has 3 hydrogen atoms. So it means that this one is the acid, this one is the alkanoic acid, and this one is the alkanol. So our job is easy. The first bit of the name comes from the alcohol, the second bit comes from the acid. But which alcohol is this? This alcohol has only 1 carbon atom, so it is methanol. This acid has 2 carbon atoms, so it is ethanoic acid. Ethanoic acid. Now, how do we name it? The first part of the name has come from the alcohol. So this one is methyl ethanoate. That is the name of that ester. So I believe that whether it is flipped, whether it's written beginning with alcohol or beginning with the acid in the formula, you'll be able to name it. Now, the last question is given using structural formula. Now, this is a problem. See, carbon, then it has 3 carbon atoms on this end, and then we have that one, hydrogen, like that. This one has that. Now, in this case, this one is easy. You don't even have to look at which one has more or which carbon has more hydrogen or what, because this one is a structural formula. It has been made easy for you. So when it is given like this, just straight away, the carbon that is doubly bonded to oxygen is the carbonyl carbon, which means that it is the carbon coming from the acid. It is the carbonyl carbon, meaning it comes from the acid. So our acid straight away begins here, going this way. So it has 3 carbon atoms. So this is propanoic acid. This is definitely propanoic acid. The carbon, which is doubly bonded to oxygen in a compound, must be the one coming from the carboxylic acid or the alkanoic acid. So in our case, this is the acid because it has these carbon atoms bonded there doubly to oxygen. So what it leaves on this other end, the other end aside of this oxygen, is definitely the alcohol. So this alcohol has only 1 carbon atom, so it is methanol. It is methanol. Now, how do you name this ester? The first bit of the name comes from the alcohol, second bit from the acid. So it is methyl propanoate. This one should be capital M, properly capital. Methyl propanoate. So that is the name of that ester. Now, for these and more, you can check out our YouTube channel, Chemistry Now with Jeff Odwal, and you can also visit our page for more. Welcome.